all love stories. Stories in general sense encompassing epic, legends, folktales, Puranas, novels and short stories. They are different, not the same. A story is a narrated narrative, but in short stories, the narrative is expressed in a particular manner, style and form. The short stories is the short story is the latest in literature and art. Understanding the short story is a must for the students of English literature. In fact, short stories was born in the 19th century with the expansion of industry and commerce and the impact of technology and machinery at the time of the Industrial Revolution. Now, you will focus why at that time short story expanded. Modern man's lives at that time have become busy. As before, the time to read great classic literature has also been reduced. So the time management sector is the key issue for the birth of short stories. But people want to know about their life, want to read literature, want to taste aesthetic. The short story or the art of telling a story in a short, brief manner has emerged to suit the modern man. The educated people of that Victorian or pre-Victorian time depended on newspapers and periodicals. You know the popularity of the periodicals of like Tatler or Spectators. They want to know instant news, want to be absorbed in events or gossips day to day, but they have less time. With emphasis on their mentality, short and quick literary forms like short stories, personal essays, or like that of other pamphlets were born to fill the pages of the magazines or periodicals. Hello friends, I am ardhendude and you are watching AD's English Literature. In this video lesson, we will try to get an idea about the definition of a short story, its biography, development, its English history. But first, what is the short story? It is hard to define the short story because it is not a ready-made thing, but a growing thing. It is an evolution. To get a comprehensive idea about this short story, we might try to define it. So to say simply, a short story is the disentangling of a complicated situation so that a single definite effect is made. It is a fictional work depicting one character's inner conflict or conflicts with others, usually having one thematic focus. Combining all these characteristics, they generally produce a kind of a single focused emotional and intellectual response in the readers, and that is the sole purpose of writing a short story. The story is built upon groundwork of incident, character and setting. It was Stevenson who said that he could conceive of but three ways to approach a story: by means of an incident about which characters group themselves, a character that plays a significant part through incidents, and a mood or feeling which both incident and character reflect. The definition of short story has been interpreted in various ways. A short story is a short literary work, but how big can it be shaped? It has been said that short stories between 500 to 2000 words are best. However, there is no absolute rule about the size. There are short stories of 1 or 2 pages and short stories of 30 or 40 pages. For example, in English literature, Hemingway's A Clean, Well-Lighted Place and William Faulkner's The Bear both contain two different kinds of stories in terms of size. The first story about an elderly man's awful end is concluded in a couple of hours and only takes up less than 4 pages. But the second narrative about a teenager named X growing up takes place over the period of long 30 odd years and more than 10 years and spans more than 100 pages. The X story is written in a spontaneous flow of rhetorical narrative and displays practically a panoramic range of characters. Huge list of characters are there. In Bengali language, one full short stories are small, while Tagore's Nostonir, Otithi, these are all big voluminous short stories. So, out of that discussion, a definition of short story as far as size you can get from it. But a truest definition can be drawn like that. A short story is a short prose work based on only 1 or 2 significant events in the author's life. Here are some of the here are some things that should be remembered while defining a short story. It is a literary art of modern times, 1780s onward, small in its size and different from novels. The subject of the short stories are more small and significant events of author's life is in focus here. A happening with feelings, a particular impression about human life acts as an inspiration for writing a short story. The crisis of any particular problem in life is the basis of a short story. A short story has only one statement. The short story often skips the interlude and moves quickly to the conclusion. So here the size is been concised. The presentation of the short story is sudden and dramatic, and the ending also has this suddenness and a kind of a drama there. Hindi short stories are famous for this kind of magic ending. It has few characters, concise compositions, restrained brevity in narrative and language. Most interestingly, unique style of presentation is the key of short stories, and different authors have different approaches regarding this. Both novels and short stories are narrative genres, but have their own distinctive features. Now, look at this diagram. Novels contains extensive anecdotes of life, and short stories are written based on 1 or two significant parts of life. The novel accepts everything, but in short stories, everything is discarded, which is superfluous. Short stories focuses upon small section of life, and novel is allowed the breadth of the world. Short story is called a slice of life for that reason. The short story deals with the particular problem of life. A short story writer have shortest possible time and the way of presentation regarding this. Retrospective feelings about life are the main motivation for writing short stories. This is why short stories are always characterized by the personality of the author. The strange feelings that the writer gets from seeing or observing or realizing the wider human life. The subject of short stories are always restricted. Short stories are always characterized by the personality of the author. The strange feelings that the writer gets from seeing or realizing the wider human life can be the subject of short story. The novel and the short story much have in common. In plot, the short story is simpler than the novel. It is confined to a single controlling incident, whereas the novel deals with many incidents and episodes. In terms of characterization, the short story confines itself to one or more main characters, whereas those characters are obviously the essential part of that plot. But the novel introduces many characters, many barely related characters which can be found in the plot constructions, and in a nutshell we can say these are the superfluous tendencies of novel writing, which becomes oftentimes baggy. In presenting the setting, the short story uses a few telling strokes, but the novel pauses for expanded description. The idea or a kind of the ideal short story usually observes the utilities of time and place, but the novel may stretch through a lifetime and pass from place to place. Few details mark the short story. Many we use in the novel. Read at one sitting, the former leaves a single concentrated impression which the novel, on account of its greater length and complexity, cannot entertain. So, short stories have the capability of arresting your mind in brief and concise mood. The tradition of telling stories and listening to stories is as ancient as world civilization. Ever since man became civilized, ever since he learned to think and imagine, storytelling began. The elders or experienced people of the village tell us the story, and others listen. We used to see our grandparents, our grandmas used to make children sleep by telling stories. We can all remember our grandpas, our grandfathers for that reasons. Stories of princess, prince, stories of demons, monsters, stories of birds, kings, horses, stories of a daring expedition. Hearing those stories, the children's mind float on the wings of imagination. We also wanted to ride on the back of Pegasus, and as he crossed the fields of Tepantor, El Dorado, our imagination also floats at that length. Everyone is there in the world of story. Children, teenagers, youth, adults, old people. Now all these fairy tales, fables, morals, folk tales contain the element of short stories. The folk stories from Persia, Arabia, India, Egypt had its first. Today, comparative studies show similarities between ancient stories from different parts of the world. The similarity can be seen in terms of fairy tales, fables, morals, folk tales, and the birth of short stories can be originated from those stories. In our India, the forms of the ancient stories are found in Jataka tales, which narrates Buddha's previous births, Panchatantra, Kathasarit Sagara, Dasakumar Charita, Hitopodes. In Greece, the Greek legends, especially Puranas, Alif Laila's story in Arabic, Persian novels, Tutinama in Persian means parrot stories. In Europe, the story found its roots in biblical religious stories and mythology. Relatively, later two remarkable collections of stories were written in Europe. One is English writer Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, the other is Italian writer Boccaccio's Decameron. These two stories are the pioneer of later European stories and novels. That is, even those stories which expanded into novels in later categories, in fictional categories. However, the true art form of this short story emerged in Europe after the Industrial Revolution and the French Revolution that I have stated earlier. By that time, the era of romance stories or a kind of romantic stories and adventure stories has also passed real life stories, life's different colors and shades have appeared. So, variegated world with its expanded beauty has already going to emerge. It was in France that the proper art form of the short story that we are defining here is being developed. Artists such as Honoré de Balzac, Pierre Charles, Brada showed how to give great significance to the small events of life. World famous short story writer like Godard de Maupassant emerged in France. He is the author of numerous stories. So when we are defining modern short story, we must remember that it had its origin in French. Russian literature is mainly famous for novels, but the contribution of the literature in short story is also great. Many talented writers who were born in Russia, such as Pushkin, Tolstoy, Gorky, but the most famous is Anton Chekhov, another Maharaja of short story. He is famous, interesting and intellectual is the kind of his stories. The remarkable storyteller, a shaper of Russian society, turned short stories into a unique art form. Somerset Maugham, D.H. Lawrence, Graham Greene, Catherine Mansfield are the notable short story writers of English language. I am not restricting the list, it can be expanded into greater criteria. World of short stories have also served into the American world. Famous American storytellers include Washington Irving, Nathaniel Hawthorne, Henry James, Edgar Allan Poe. So the list can be expanded for our better understanding. The strictly modern short story had its birth with Poe and Hawthorne in America and Goethe and Mérimée in France. Since these early days, a host of short story writers had sprung up in America and in England, in France, in Russia, and in other countries of Europe. Chief among those writers we can list Stevenson, Kipling in England, Mérimée, Maupassant, Daudet, Cope, Anatole, Balzac in France, Pushkin and Tolstoy, that I have already mentioned these names, in Russia, and convoluted from the ancient tales when the short story emerged as a genre in 19th century. It was seen as something totally new and modern. Popular and literary magazines began increasingly to publish short stories that often reflected the dominant literary trends of the day. Even the short and brief parts or pros and cons of life is being reflected there. Up to that point, the primary focus of most stories had been on the plot. Nathaniel Hawthorne was one of the most important early writers in the shaping of the modern short story. I mean the modern. His plays proved character and the moral significance of the events, leaving their physical reality ambiguous. So here a kind of a psychological journey started. In young Goodman Brown, for example, the dark meetings in the woods of the Salem town people are less important than the spiritual changes in Brown himself. In his 1842 review of the Hawthorne's Twice Told Tales that has been published in 1837, that's a fabulous writing. Edgar Allan Poe became the first writer to define the short story as the attempt to achieve a single focused effect. Poe demonstrated a kind of artistic theory in the Cask of Amontillado, manipulating the setting, character, and dialogue to lead the reader inexorably towards the emotional state most appropriate for the perfect murder. I say you must go through these tales. Now, how to understand a short story? To understand a short story, we have to read the art of the short story first. It makes use of a variety of devices such as point of view, style, plot, structure to evoke the reader's emotions, imaginations, and intellect. The reader's overall experience is influenced by the author's decisions and mastery of these techniques. First of all, the point of view or the perspective of the author. The three fundamental point of view strategies are there in short story writing, notably these three. First of all, omniscient. The all-knowing author narrates here. Next, first person, the author lets one of his characters narrate here. And the third, central intelligence. The author filters the narrative through the perceptions of a single character, and the third one is quite complicated. Let's look at the few examples to see that not everything is as simple as it seems. The cigarette room by French author Alain Robbe-Grillet. The author grimly describes a painting that depicts a murder. Now, this typical example illustrates an uncommon point of view technique known as the objective. The author here remains silent, and he is a merely objective observer. He is never allowing the reader to access to a character's thoughts, and that is typically quite difficult for the readers to comprehend this type of stories. Again, Henry James introduced a novel type of point of view, third-person central intelligence. In his 1884 classic, The Art of Fiction, in which all aspects of a narrative are filtered through the perception, feelings, imaginations, and thoughts of the main character. Here, he explains all those things. The perspective or the point of view here evokes a feeling of immediateness and psychological realism similar to that of Henry James' masterful short story, The Beast in the Jungle, which was published in 1903. A generation of short story writers, including Irish writer James Joyce, and their British short story writer Catherine Mansfield, and American John O'Hara, Catherine Ann Porter, and John Cheever. These all writers were greatly influenced by this Henry's philosophy, or the art of fictional writing, or the style of that sort of development. Particularly, I like to mention another author, that is James Joyce, obviously, for his stylistic point of view, and here he is a kind of a advancement. And his Dubliner Stories, which was published in 1914, is of course an epoch-making feature in the 20th century development of short story writing, particularly the new perspective. These stories offer painfully thoughtful representations of life in Joyce's narrative, and the native city of Dublin is being here expressed through impressionism, which conveys a feelings of emotional and intellectual perception of the world. In the later part of short story writing, different models of first-person perspective was later improvised, and newer thoughts were introduced. Henry James again had been the experimenter in this case. His epistolary point of view, which was published a bundle of letters, which was telling of a tale through a series of letters. Here we can find out 6 odd persons were having a French boarding house, and they are exchanging letters, and through their letters we can comprehend the entire story. Other first-person point of view include the interior monologue. That's quite interesting, and the modern novel writing is also going through as parallel to this. The characters and the dramatic intensity is there through this monologue, and the character addresses one or more identified or unidentified listeners in that case, and through this unfolding of the drama we can get the entire story. The first person narrator is typically identified, but they can also be anonymous or even gender ambiguous, and in some of the modern short stories that we can find out in Nadine Gordimer's story Termitary from 1974, and obviously we can find out the modern stories like that of Just Like a Tree, which was published in 1962 by Gaines, and even few are there non-human characters involved in some of the ghost stories we can find out there. Now, another notable point that should be understood here, that readers frequently confuse the first-person narrator statements for those of the authors, who frequently invent an unreliable narrator with ironic outcomes. So here, that is the twist of the modern short story writing. Again, the next feature that I like to discuss here, obviously, the style. The style is the man, as we all know. Style refers to the author's deliberate word selection and arrangement of words, sentences, paragraphs to make a particular or receive a particular response from the reader. The point of view technique that is used develops into the author's style. The point of view or the style of the point of view is getting the style oriented. The first person point of view results in a simple style if it is recorded as spoken, more complex if it is written, and central intelligence generates a style that is typically slightly elevated above the intelligence level of the focal character. The omniscient point of view, the all-knowing author here is, results in a relatively complex style. Ernest Hemingway's straightforwardness, frugal writing style, image choices, so subtle changes in the psychological state of his characters, and that's quite interesting, and that interest or that stylistic feature stamps him out as a unique writer. Next come another interesting feature, the plot and structure. The plot structuring or the device of the entire story planning is here most interesting. Maupassant, the French writers that I have mentioned, is regarded one of the great plot writer or plot structurer. I must say, the plot structure of Maupassant, which is renowned for its realism, clarity and directness, explores the theme of human cruelty and includes his observations of French society in his writing. His 200 odd short stories, along with his novels and some of his travel sketches, brings forward a unique device of telling a story through intricacies of plot, through meticulous designing of human psychology too. The short story contains a variety of plot types and structures, as you know. A typical plot has a start, which start with a problem. Then there is a middle, that means a developing or the development is there, and the end is there where the problem is resolved. But oftentimes we can meet no ending at all, because that ending is open-ended and where the authors make their own significant openness for the readers to conclude, and that's typically O. Henry's style of ending the story with a magic. That magic is obviously elevated into a new caliber, into a new quality in few of the writers' technical exuberance. You must know, a typical of the stories are there where a story happens within a story. There is secondary storyline subplots, or there may be two or more equally important narratives progressing simultaneously, that is double plotting. Usually all these things make the structure of the plot more varied, and as the evolution of the short story is going on, modern short stories are making new turns here. Foreshadowing, reversals of fortune, digressions, abrupt transition, and the juxtaposition of disparate characters or settings are some other plot enhancing devices that most of the writers use in their writing technique. Now, notably, once again, I come to Maupassant's mastery of short story writing and his most of the notable writings are encompassing all these things. Now, even though he has been a pessimistic writer on life and his short stories have a cruel twist here and there at the end, the reader is left to determine whether the fate or fright causes tragedy for human being or not. So all these things make the realism of the drama or a realism of the short story into a new caliber. The notable things that I find, or we will find rather, in the modern short stories that we frequently meet, the ambiguity that is quite deliberate from the author's point of view, from the author's perspective. It is like that of open-endedness, and as opposed to the clear resolution, closed-endedness, in a plot. Many commercial writers, particularly who are expecting the next series or the next part to be sold, they oftentimes use this type of surprising conclusions, particularly those surprising conclusions. If you want to get the full comprehension of that type, you can get O. Henry's, and O. Henry's writing has a magic ending, oftentimes perplexes us. These are quite paradoxical writing style, and unexpected resolution is there. For example, A Gift of the Magi, A Rose for Family, is there from another William Faulkner. These unexpected endings are oftentimes complex and have a serious effect too. Another point is the devices. Now, as a short story writers employ a variety of rhetorical devices such as paradox, metaphors, imagery, patterns, recurring themes, symbolism, irony, for contrast and emphasis, and these are all for drawing the attraction of the readers towards his story. The strength of Catherine and Potter's flooding Judas is enhanced by its overt use of symbolism, contrasts reality with the fallibility of human perception, which is at the core of most contemporary fiction for the reader's benefit. American writer O'Connor is a master of irony. Again, his story, A Good Man, is hard to find, in which a manipulative grandmother imposes her will on a situation with the ironic result that she and her family are killed by escaped. So these are the basic patterns or basic criterion by which we can gauge the depth of a story, and we can evaluate the terms and conditions by which we can get towards the meaning or get the beautiful language or linguistic part that we can get from short stories. But again, we can have that one point clear, that short stories are varied and getting complicated day by day, and we as a reader, whenever we are getting towards the meaning of a short story, then the meaning is get expanded and the perception is going to change time and again with the historical knowledge of our civilization. That's the point we should remember too. The subject of a short story is often mistaken for its theme. The common subject for modern short stories include race, ethnic tension, gender, class, social issues such as poverty, drugs, violence, divorce. This subject allow the writer to comment upon the larger theme that is the heart of the story or the heart of the short story. Some of the major themes that I must discuss here. of the 20th century short stories as well as longer forms of fiction too are human isolation, alienation, and personal dejections, personal trauma such as anxiety, love, hate, male-female relationship, family, and migration, and those the conflict of generations, imitations from innocence to experience, or a kind of a journey from innocence to experience, friendship, motherhood, illusions, reality, self-delusion, self-discovery, the individual conflict, and that of the conflict between or the tension between individual and that of society. So these all things, even the morality, the spiritual struggle, the relationship between life and art, though those subjects often pop up in different forms, in different style, in different short stories. The art of the short story employs the techniques of point of view, style, plot, structure, a wide range of devices that stimulate emotional, imaginative, and intellectual responses in the reader. The writer's choice and control of these techniques determines the reader's overall experiences. So what I say that modern short stories or the modern understanding of the short story rather can have its different parameters from critical point of view. The short story materials that we often say comprise of theme, incidents, characters, settings, emotions, plus the writer's own style. It is a man's personality or writer's personality coloring his words. It is his habitual manner of thinking or grouping words and of securing effects. It is the sum total of his heredity, environment, thought, will, taste expressed in his writing, particularly in his speech. In literature, it implies not only individuality but originality and distinction. Fine writing is not a good style. It is like putting on Sunday clothes when one has not to be used to them. Last of all, every story has a title. This should be a brief, apt, and suggestive, and should invoke a kind of a curiosity. Long titles that betray the contents have been outgrown. So the modern innovative ways of writing a short story and understanding a short story, you must see here. I have listed the way of understanding the short story in different ways, in different points. You must look at those things. Now, there are different kind of short stories, different parameters are there. Those type of short stories can be enlisted here. I have enlisted those stories here in different categories. You must look this one. I am just going to mention a few of the random sections here. In terms of adventure stories, you can find out the story of some dangerous, adventurous events that pop ups in it might be some expedition on discovery of oil, discovery of achievement. We can find out Arthur Conan Doyle's The Adventures of the Empty House. You can see the horror section, these type of stories about monsters, supernatural powers, places and buildings. But different authors have different approaches in interpreting the horror. It might be physical as well as mental. The strange and frightening things are being described, these kind of stories, but it might be a psychological journey too. The Hanged Stone by Rabindranath Tagore is a fantastic example of this kind of horror stories. Now, crime and detection kind of stories are there, detective stories. These are all popular. This type of stories is focusing on solving a riddle, and as the character is solving, so as the readers are going through page by page what the solution should be. The Adventure of the Priory School by Arthur Conan Doyle is a good example of that. In the short stories categories, you can also find humorous stories. In these type of stories, humorous plays or the humorous verbal wit and the characteristic features of displaying a kind of humor, joy, mirth is there. In education category, you can find out the stories like those which is itself telling the part of education that one can get in way of life, as well as it can be related to fantasies to education or the way or the new approaches to education. We can find out the gentleman from San Francisco, as for example, by the Russian writer Ivan Brunin. That is a beautiful story in its own unique presentation. It was written in 1921. Science fiction categories, in terms of short story presentation, you can find out a kind of a science fiction that may be involving a travel from one place to another place, or a planetary journey or a journey to solar system. It's might be some imaginary worlds and some imaginary kingdoms. Fear No More by George Anthony is a beautiful short story in that category. We believe that the short story is one of the most exciting, important literary forms that are mounting the widest possible readership. Presently, in the din and bustle of daily life, fewer and fewer people these days have the leisure of reading full-paged novels or epics. Rather, they resort to short stories nowadays, and with the ebook publication, they find it worth reading while at travels also. We thus will proceed further into healthy matures of short stories in near future. Who knows that short stories might be shorter day by day, or it might gain a cryptic model. But whatever it may be, short stories and its popularities are making our life simple as well as entertaining through the literary formats, through the literary ways. I might extend this understanding of short story into further lectures, but I have tried here to give you a glimpse of the short stories, its key features, its modern way, as well as its route of journeys or its further journeys or futuristic journeys, if it has the tendencies of further elevating into a great literary forms. So I think this particular lecture will benefit you in understanding short stories, and if you have any queries regarding short stories, you might pop up here, ask me questions. I will try my best to give some possible answers. Like, share, comment, and obviously subscribe to my channel. Bye bye. Thank you.